All right, so welcome to the first of the grab bag episodes of A Brief History of Everything. This is a much shorter episode, I promise you. I know that our normal episodes tend to go quite long. We're actually holding consistently at an hour and 20. I'll have you know, both episodes so far have been around an hour and 20. So
Nothing but solid.
Nothing but solid. We are very consistent. I am Chris Buchanan. This is Thomas Ellie.
Hello.
We are both still here and we are both still talking history. Or just still talking, whichever way you want to take that. What we're going to do today is, in the series of questions that I've been asked by Year 7 students in particular, there's a number of them that are obviously these longer form expanded questions. Then there are these little ones that are a 2-second answer, that are a bit more like a grab bag sort of style answer. So that's what we're calling this. This is the history podcast, grab bag as it were. So what we're going to do today is literally just really quick go through these five questions that we've been asked. So the first question that I was asked was, what was the cost of the Titanic? Now, we could be pedantic and we could go right back through and analyse human cost, and we'll talk about that in a minute. $7.5 million is the answer for that. And that's in dollars back in the day it was built. Modern equivalent, about $500 million. Which, when you look at some of the big ocean liners today, surprisingly cheap.
Well, actually, I can't say I really know the cost of a modern ocean liner, but I would imagine that they would be quite up there. And so $500 million, when you told me that, was quite a surprise. I would have thought, due to inflation and blah, 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 it would have been, towards the billions, given the reverence and the supposed modernity of it. But
to give you an idea, the movie cost $200 million.
Well, the movie cost me 3 hours of my life. I'm not going to get back.
Yeah, especially when you walk in there and know full well the boat's going to sink.
Yeah, it's like sort of no attempt for spoiler alert right there. The boat is sinking. Mind you, and it's worth thinking about, there's a great analysis of the film. It was originally marketed as a disaster movie, turned into, after test audience watched it, they then rebranded it and recut it so that it was a romance adventure.
I saw the other day, by the way, that Billy Zane argued that Rose should have gone back to him.
I think Billy Zane has argued a lot of weird things in his life. And one of them being that Rose should have gone back to him.
I think so too. But just quickly on that cost of the Titanic. That's the cost of the Titanic in terms of the financial cost of the Titanic at the time. But there was more of a cost.
Yeah, when you first asked me this question, trying to put on an hour and 20 minute spin on it, and then I think we realised that the question itself probably deserves more focused attention, was that what does cost mean? Does it just mean the price tag attached to it? So when I was walking down, the dockyards, would I find a girder beam with a £2.50 sign hanging off it? But what are other interpretations of cost? And I thought, well, what was the lost potential of those people who died on it? And I'm sure that there's some sort of like economist historians who would be able to say, the average economic output of a person was this. And so you could actually interpret cost as a number of ways. What was the lost potential of, those many people dying in terms of money? And then another thing that sort of popped up in my head was, well, what about those famous people who died? So one of the famous people who died on there was John Jacob Astor IV. He's in charge of the Astor family fortune. The Waldorf Astoria is a very famous hotel in New York. His death, what did that cost to the Astoria Foundation or the Astor family? Another one being the Guggenheim family, Benjamin Guggenheim, famous for the Guggenheim Museum as well as his patronage of the arts. What great artist didn't quite manage to get their paycheck because he was no longer there to sort of sniff out a good artist? And
on another way that I'd put that too is White Star Lines.
White Star Lines.
White Star Lines, the largest of the companies at the time, by far and away the most profitable, and White Star Lines is ruined by this.
Yeah.
This is really the beginning of the end of White Star Lines. Now, obviously, they do try to continue on, and then you have the incident that takes place where the Britannic goes off to World War One and is sunk. And you've got the Olympic, which was plagued by issues all the way along. There's a great, by great I mean ridiculous theory that I have read the full document of, which indicates that the Titanic was an insurance job, and that it was actually the Olympic, which anything you know about the Olympic, when the Olympic was launched, the Olympic actually had an accident as it was being launched and it was damaged. And there's somebody who wrote a thesis that the Olympic was rebranded the Titanic and was sunk very publicly to claim the insurance money, to which any sane and rational person, beyond looking at the difference of the ships, would also look at the cost to the company and go, you didn't gain anything by the insurance money on the Titanic in comparison to the amount of money you just lost for killing people. So on that
brand
front,
damage there.
you know, any brand manager would say to you if you went, we're going to sink this ship and claim the insurance money with people on it, the brand manager's going, no, this is not a good day.
Yeah, I think
Let's not do this, shall we?
When you've marketed yourself as having built the unsinkable ship and then it sinks, I don't think there's much repair you can do to your brand there. I think you're in a downward spiral, whether it takes 10 years, 20 years to
It's not clever.
to hit. No, it's not good.
No, not clever at all. Now, the second of the questions was about the Eiffel Tower, and it was, why was the Eiffel Tower built? Now,
Aliens.
yeah, aliens. No, that's how. That's how,
Oh,
not
sorry,
why,
sorry.
Thomas. Remember, you got to get the different levels of questioning right.
Yeah.
It's the why was it built, and we all know that the reason it was built was to increase the television signal within Paris. No, it wasn't built for that. No, it was built for the World's Fair. It was constructed for the World's Fair. It was constructed by the firm Run.
I miss
By
the
Gustav
idea of a World's Fair. I've never been to World's Fair. I don't think I've been alive while there's been a World's Fair.
Yeah,
I wish they still were.
Expo 88.
Is that the one with the wigs in Simpsons?
No, that was the Whigs Fair. That was the Knoxville World's Fair.
Oh, right. The much
but-
maligned.
The much maligned Suns Fair.
I wish there were still World's Fairs, guys. I mean, look at all the great things that have happened at World's Fairs. I mean, a president was assassinated.
Exactly.
We got...
You just want to look at all the wonderful things that have happened at a World's Fair and begin with the assassination of a president.
Yes, but look at who comes as a result of this turmoil that comes from the
We'll get into that for question 3. But no, it was built for the World's... It was only supposed to be temporary. Eiffel ran the firm and came up with the general concept. One of his engineers, a guy called Coughlin, I believe, was the person who actually really worked on the design of it. They liked it so much they just went, oh, okay, we'll just leave it up. So that was the main reason why it was built for this fair, and it sort of became a bit of a symbol, and they decided to leave it up there. One of the things I love doing in classroom, for example, is I do an amazing race game. One of the things I will do with that is I'll sometimes come up with a clue that says, this structure designed by Gustav Eiffel welcomes everybody. Get them all to jump on the Eiffel Tower, and of course the answer is the Statue of Liberty. So I just love doing that as a bit of a thrower question there. Leading us into question 3. Favourite president. Now, Thomas, I'll let you, Teddy Roosevelt, take this.
Obviously, we're talking about American presidents.
Yes,
so
we are.
We're not going to say any other presidents.
Nino Aquino.
But yes, anyone who knows my preferences for American history, Theodore Roosevelt is one of them. There's a great trilogy of biographies, and this is how I was introduced to him on any sort of non-superficial level. The Rise of Theodore Roosevelt by Edward Morris, and then Theodore Rex, and then Colonel Roosevelt. This is the trilogy that introduced me to it. Theodore Roosevelt, amazing president, a genuine progressive. This was at a time when Republicans weren't buffoons, and they didn't advocate for things like walls and banning ethnic and religious groups. This was a time when they were progressive thinkers and changing society for the better and not the worse. Theodore Roosevelt, he takes America into this golden era of what I think most of the founding fathers would have hated. He acquires an empire. He centralizes power in the federal government. He just runs roughshod over the Constitution. He's my favorite president because of just the flagrant disregard he has for these inane traditions that had developed in America as well.
So you're basically saying that you like a president that doesn't listen to the Congress, really, that doesn't listen to anyone else, and just does what he wants because he's the president. How dare you, sir? My favourite president, by the way, is Andrew Jackson. Now, this is a man who ignored the Congress and redefined the presidency and ran roughshod over the top of those elected members, and, you know, as was mentioned in the first podcast, nearly beat an assassin to death with his cane, and basically made the power of the president stronger than the power of the Congress, arguing that if people are directly voting for the president, they voted for me, they want me, I should be the president. And really does start the centralised role, because the role initially under the Founding Fathers of America was one of a general guidance role, but no real power in the presidency itself. They didn't want this idea of a dictator. And what Jackson basically says is, you keep voting for me. Well, if you're going to vote for me directly, I should be allowed to do what I want. Why can't I do what I want? What's the point of voting for a president if you then don't actually want me to do anything? So we have very similar interest in what we want in our president. Someone who doesn't listen.
Someone who doesn't listen or consult or listen to the checks and balances that are enacted with the legislative.
Oh no! I just realised, but by that logic, we're all for Trump apparently.
No. You see, because our two favourite presidents had a full brain.
Oh yes, Jackson threw better parties than Trump ever could. Anyway, now the last two in this grab bag are really good questions, and it's not about these are not about, you know, right or wrong answers. It's the favourite. So favourite era, your favourite historical era.
If I had to pick a favourite era, I would probably say it's the Enlightenment, where the great thinkers that shaped the preceding modern world come out. Especially looking at some of those great thinkers, Voltaire, who we referenced in an earlier episode, Immanuel Kant, who comes into it. I mean, the great disciplines that we draw on for understanding the world, sociology, anthropology, biology, the hard sciences, history as a proper discipline, all emerge in the Enlightenment era, and we get these great thinkers who go on to influence things like democracy and the French Revolution, the American Revolution. You get the constitutions based on these thinkings. You get a better way of thinking and understanding the world, which then evolves into the various schools of thought. And just teaching the ideas of the Enlightenment, or being aware of or learning about the ideas of the Enlightenment and the people who think of those ideas, I think it gives you great insight into what it means to be a person, but it also gives you a really acute awareness that if you have a good idea, your ideas can change the world.
That's a really interesting sort of way to put it, because I was just thinking then about my favourite era, and I think a majority of people will expect New Kingdom Egypt. And to be honest with you, it probably is New Kingdom Egypt. But a very close second is the Aegean world in a similar sort of era, because you've got the big mixture between the thinkers, you know, you've got your Aristotles and your Platos and all those sorts of people. And on the other hand, you've got these military dynasties, places like ancient Sparta, and you've got all of this sort of the Mycenaeans, and that whole Aegean era, I think, is fascinating as an era. Having said that, it does go back to a New Kingdom Egypt for me. And the reason it goes back to New Kingdom Egypt is that there's this sudden, again, progression within Egypt, that Egypt just seems to spring out of absolutely nowhere. It doesn't defer to any other civilization around it whatsoever. Egypt is basically, we are a self-contained civilization and world, and we don't really care what anyone else does. We don't care what our neighbours are doing. The Egyptian New Kingdom period, that first part of New Kingdom in particular, they're not worried about their neighbours. They're not going on territorial expansion missions. Their focus is, how can we make Egypt the strongest Egypt it could possibly be? What can we do to keep our lives strong? I like that about Egypt, because rather than a history of going and, you know, attacking other civilizations, and don't get us wrong, they did go beat people up from time to time. To be fair, most of them were Nubians. And, you know, I always feel sorry. I always feel sorry for the poor Nubians, because the pharaoh needs to prove that they're a ruler. You need to do that in warfare, and the only surefire thing you had was go over the border and beat up some Nubians. Don't worry, Nubia gets their revenge at the end of Egypt. But, spoiler alert, but New Kingdom Egypt, I think for me, but only just over that period of Greece. I think that's fascinating. And the last part is the history that you most like teaching.
Oh, that will always come back to what your students are interested in the most. If you've got a class who just eats up the drivel that comes out of ancient history, then of course you're going to enjoy teaching it. Obviously the audience, so that's what I should really be saying. The audience dictates what I think I like the most. But if I had an audience who said, just teach us anything about history, I would love to teach, and probably because I actually do teach it, Germany between the wars. So for modern history, the national study in Year 12, I love teaching Germany. And it's this period of history that I don't think, unless you are made aware of it, anyone thinks about. They go, World War One ends, and then World War Two starts. And in the sort of way of thinking, you almost think, it's a blink of an eye. No, there's a good 15 years in there where it looks like maybe World War Two might not start, maybe it will. I mean, the question of how did Hitler rise and how did the Nazis rise to power is a question in and of itself. But there's this 1920s sort of Germany that looks as though, wow, we're never going to see another war again. And the intrigue and the politics and the playing and the will they, won't they. It's sort of like if we went back to Titanic. You know how it's going to end, but the story there, unlike Titanic, is far more interesting and engaging. And you hold out against hope that people like Stresemann might be able to avert the coming Nazis. Even though you know the Nazis are coming, you think, oh wow, there's a chance that maybe the Nazis might not rise this time, even though I've taught it like 5 times, and every time it just ends the same. The Nazis always get power.
So it's not quite like Titanic. So Eva Braun never turned around to Adolf Hitler and said, paint me like one of your French girls.
No, there was no painting off French girls.
But he was a painter, so it could have happened.
He was a horrible painter by all accounts.
Yeah, no one ever says, I've got a Hitler on the wall. No. It's just over to the right.
People with a very fine, very close to the scalp haircut might say, I have a Hitler on the wall. But
that's a different thing altogether.
Yes.
Now, for me, again, you're probably expecting Egypt. You're not going to get it this time.
Oh,
you're not going to get Egypt this time. The thing that I most like teaching is here. What we've got in New South Wales is the history extension course, which is all about the history of history, and it's the how history is told and how history is written, and that for me is the fascinating part of the story. Is not so much the story itself, but the how it's put together. How does someone craft a story? How does someone write a history? Whose version of history do you get? Why do you get that version of history? Unpacking different viewpoints. And I use Napoleon Bonaparte as a case study when I teach it. And the reason I use Napoleon Bonaparte as a case study is that Napoleon Bonaparte is one of the most divisive figures for historians. Forget just in history as a discipline. For historians, you get one of two things with Napoleon Bonaparte. He's the greatest man that ever lived, or he's a horrible tyrant and a bloodthirsty maniac. You never get a middle ground. Nobody is neutral on the topic of Napoleon Bonaparte. He's either brilliant or he's a megalomaniac. There's no middle ground there. The historians who love him really love him and make excuses for him. And you go back and you unpack why they make excuses for him. The historians who hate him really hate him and blame him for things he had nothing to do with. Now, again, the idea of why history is written the way it's written is the thing that I love teaching the most, because you think a lot deeper. When we're talking events, it's most of the time it's a fairly shallow discussion. We're talking events, we're talking concepts. We do get deep into it, but by and large, the basic information is a very shallow level topic to start with. The how is this written? The why is this written? The purpose behind how this is written. That for me is the nuts and bolts of everything we're looking at with history. And it's the thing that I love teaching as well, because traditionally in a classroom, early on you don't get that. Early on with your history you don't get that. And I think it's the first time that students feel like adults, realistically, when it comes to history. I think it's the first time they really feel like they're getting taught something that's higher end and more grown up.
Yeah, I would agree that those ideas about how and why history's been constructed are probably the most important question. Like, yes, you are correct. Your ability to cite facts and figures is not necessarily indicative of how good of a thinker of history you are. To the point where when I teach, or I think all of us will do this, when we teach the different approaches to history, I always like to stop and ask kids, would you say you fit into this school, or you fit into this school, or would you say you fit into this school? And they always sort of and find it difficult to say, oh yes, I definitely like this kind of thinking, which is lamentable to me. I like to see a kid, or a student, sorry, I'd like to see a student who goes, yes, that fits my thinking. Because often when you throw the question to kids, they just want to pick the most recent one, which is still alive, because that's the most valid, because that's the one that's now. And I always enjoy it when a kid says, actually, this whole Marxist approach to understanding history, I actually think that's right. And those sorts of students who then become aware of how they think become some of the best history students.
It's the old argument of truth is just the argument that has the upper hand.
Yes.
That's one of my favourite general quotes. Okay, so with that, I think we can wrap up the grab bag. Again, only brief, by our standards brief, by most standards probably long-winded and painful. But we'll be back in the not too distant future with the next episode. I've been Chris, this has been Thomas.
Goodbye.
This has been a brief history of everything, and we'll catch you on the flip side.